welcome to Good Grief, the podcast dedicated to demystifying and destigmatizing grief with compassion and humor. I'm Nikki. I'm an end-of-life doula and a grief coach in Columbus, Ohio. And I would like to say welcome back. Thank you so much for being here, and welcome to Season 2 of Good Grief with Nikki the Death Doula. This is the first time I've broken things up into seasons after 2 years on the air. So this was different. And if you would like to know how I enjoyed my break, I would like to let you know that I didn't get a break, because during the 4 weeks that I was not airing my podcast, I was working on the next 10. So I will take a break. That's why I broke these down into seasons, so I can take a break. But my break's probably going to happen 2 or 3 weeks into Season 2. So while you were busy listening to other podcasts or just living your life, I was busy over here meeting with some amazing people and reading through some amazing content. I use the word amazing a lot, don't I? That's okay. But I'm very excited. I've already recorded a few really cool guest interviews, and I'm so excited for you to hear this season. And I have found more great topics to talk about. But before I do that, I owe some Patreon shout outs. So Samantha, I've owed you one for a while, and I am so sorry. You became a Patreon member back in May, and I completely spaced on, I even saw it, and I was like, oh, she's so great. And I think I may have even sent you a message saying thank you, but I didn't give you your shout out. So Samantha, thank you so much for being a patron. And welcome to the super special elite group of Nikki the Death Doula's Patreons. It's not that secretive, guys. It's fine. But if you want to be totally awesome like Samantha and get a shout out here on my podcast, you head on over to patreon.com/Nikki the Death Doula and become a patron. I said I was only going to do shout outs for people of the higher tiers, but I don't care. If you give $1 a month, I'm going to give you a shout out. Okay, so enough of that. I know listening to people harp on and on about Patreons and ads and all that. That's why I try not to put that on here. Will I ever? I might. I don't know. But you're going to have to hear about my Patreon at least once an episode. I'm sorry. If you have the premium version of Spotify, you can fast forward. So you can just fast forward through me talking about my Patreons. But that's not why you're here today. You're here to listen to some cool content about all things grief, death, and dying with compassion and sometimes a little bit of humor. That's what I'm all about. So today we're going to talk about, what does death positive mean? I'm really excited to bring this episode. I feel like this should have been one of my first episodes, or one of the first things I talk about, because I talk about being death positive. It's on my website. I've talked about the death positive movement. I've brought this up more than once on this show. So let's take a minute and let's break that down. Let's see what that means. What does death positive mean, and what is the death positive movement? So I can circle back everything in my new life and world revolving around death and dying to my patron saint, as I refer to her, Caitlin Dowdy. Caitlin has a YouTube channel called Ask a Mortician, and for a while it was just kind of Q&As. People would send questions, and she'd answer all sorts of questions around death and dying. And she's written several books since then. She's released mini documentaries since then, and I know I'm a patron of hers. I'm on her Patreon, and so I have some inside scoop on a new project she's working on that is so exciting. So she is actually where I first heard about death doulas, and it stuck with me, and here I am today. So she was the first person I heard talk about the death positive movement, and I will have links in the description to her website, which is the Order of the Good Death, and she has a whole page on there on what death positive means and what the movement is. Basically, the quickest encapsulation, I'll read it directly from her site as to what death positive means. People who are death positive believe that it is not morbid or taboo to speak openly about death. They see honest conversations about death and dying as the cornerstone of a healthy society. So there you go. As long as you're not one of those people that wrinkles your nose puts up your hands or goes, ew, when people talk about death and dying, if you embrace that subject and say, yeah, sure, let's talk about it, you're a death positive person. And I appreciate that. I'm a death positive person. Obviously, I should hope so, given my line of work and what I do. So what is the history? Where does the death positive movement come from? I feel like we can kind of look at the beginning of death positivity and the death positive movement to the beginning of hospice. Hospice is actually not that old. It's something we feel like we've all heard of. Maybe we feel like it's something that's just been around, but it really has not been all that long. The very first hospice in the U.S. opened in 1974. And hospice has only started slightly before the one here in the U.S. over in the U.K. I think it was the late 60s. And I've mentioned it on this podcast before. So fast forward just a couple of years, and I can't believe that this is this recent, but in 1976, there was a legislation that gave individuals the right to refuse unwanted medical intervention to sustain their life. This is where living wills and advance directive paperwork came from. Guys, 1976, okay? Our advance directive paperwork is only that old. Prior to that, there was really no good way to advocate for yourself, and unwanted medical intervention to, feeding tubes, CPR, artificial breathing, all of that was just more common. So, yeah. Sit on that for a minute. We finally were given a little bit of autonomy over our own health care futures, our own decisions in 1976. But as time went on through the 70s, Dia de los Muertos became a little more big in the United States. It's been in, Mexico for quite some time in Latin American cultures. But we started seeing that coming about in the 70s here in the United States too, which is so great. Then fast forward again to a little bit later in the 80s, palliative care became a thing. Palliative care didn't exist until every time I read about this, you guys, my mind is just a little bit more blown. This stuff is this recent. We take for granted all these things that we have that did not exist even just at the beginning of my lifetime, or the lifetime of even possibly your parents for my younger listeners. But yeah, palliative care wasn't even really a thing up until the 80s. We can say a lot came out with the death positivity movement and thinking more about mortality during the AIDS crisis. And there was a beautiful woman I met during my training for my end-of-life doula work who works at ANELDA, who was doing what we do before what we do was a thing with a lot of AIDS patients. She was finding in the hospitals that there were people dying of AIDS and the nurses refused to touch them. The doctors refused to treat them, and they were alone. A lot of them were estranged by their family then, because at that point they were cast out by their friends, their family. They had no one, and they were dying alone. And she would go and sit with them, hold their hand so they weren't alone. But this brought death up to the forefront, to bring a pandemic in. And what are we going to see? We're going to see, we're not facing our death. We're not thinking about it. We're not talking about it. Right? So there were a lot of things that happened that kind of just clustered all together that started becoming part of a death positive. It started us as a culture looking at death again. Because if you look at the scheme of life, and I'm talking about Western culture right now. So if you look at the history of how we dealt with death and dying, pre-Civil War, let's go back to pioneer days, or even early first American settlers came here, right? Life expectancy was terrible. Infant mortality was terrible. Death was around us all the time because we didn't have the medical advancements we do today. So it was not an uncommon thing to have somebody in your home dying. And the communities would come together to help take care of them. And then when they died, to bury them. It was there. If everybody died at home with their family around them to take care of them their final days. Okay. Fast forward to the Civil War, and this is when embalming was created because soldiers were dying out on the field and their loved ones back home wanted to see them again. And, you couldn't just put their corpse on an airplane and fly them back home. Even if you could do that today, it would take long enough that their body would decompose and it would not be pleasant to look at. So a scientist came up with this perfect chemical mixture to preserve bodies so that they could send them back home to their loved ones. Their loved ones could see them and bury them in their home, or wherever they're, in their hometown, wherever they were from. So then, okay, I always try to remain as objective as I can on this show. It became an opportunity for businesses to open. Read between the lines here, people. This became a nice opportunity for individuals to open a business around this. So the funeral industry was born. There were, places where you could have your loved one embalmed so that you could have viewing several days later. They came up with fancier and fancier caskets instead of just wrapped in linen or in a, pine box or a basket. And it kind of exploded from there. And at that point, and also during this time, nursing homes started opening up. We started having extended care facilities for our loved ones. So, hey, we don't have to deal with death anymore. There are these great businesses that will handle all this for us. We don't have to look at death and dying anymore, you guys. We can keep it at arm's length. We can even close the door and pretend it does not exist. And we can just live our lives happy and free while our family members are off doing that icky dying business somewhere else that's not in front of us. Okay, I'm doing a terrible job of remaining objective. I'm trying so hard. I really do try hard not to sway anybody or give my opinions here on this podcast, but I do it all the time anyway. Okay, so now we're getting to a point after this has gone on for, 100 or so years, a couple hundred years, that we're seeing the benefits of going back to how we did things prior to all this. The green burial movement started opening up in the late 90s, early 2000s. People were starting to get interested in, what about green burial? What if I don't need to be embalmed? What if I don't want a big fancy casket? Can I just be put in the ground as is? And yeah, now that's a beautiful thing. So because of all these things that happened in the past that started us looking at death, we started realizing it's here, not real. I mean, it's here. Death is around us. It's part of life. And we're starting to see again that we can't keep it at arm's length. We can't make it go away. So why not embrace it? And that's basically the crux of the death positive movement, right? Just embracing the fact that we're all going to die one day, and let's talk about it. Because the more you talk about something, the less stigmatized it is, right? Cool. So, how can we be a more death positive peoples? How can you be more death positive? Well, step one, just looking at yourself in the mirror and saying, I'm going to die one day. Ta-da! There you go. You've accepted your mortality as a human being. You know that you're going to die. You are. So that's a good step one. Another, step two, you don't have to do these steps in order. Okay. This isn't a process, but the next thing, have conversations with your friends and family. Broach that subject with some of them and see, you might be surprised. There might be people in your life that are aching to talk about this just as much as you are. But reach out to your friends and family. Biggest thing, talk to your family about your wishes. What do you want at your end of life? What do you want for your afterlife care? Tell them. Have that conversation. If you're looking for other ways to have these conversations, there's death cafes. I host a monthly death cafe here in Columbus, Ohio. And I also do a virtual one. So information for that's on my website if you are interested in attending one. But you can go to deathcafe.com. And you can find a death cafe happening in your area, if there are any. You can find virtual ones you can attend. There's another lady at Anelda I met in one of our peer mentoring groups, a fellow doula, who hosts a monthly, I don't know if it's monthly, she hosts a death cafe in Second Life. So if you're a Second Life player, you can go to a death cafe there. And I love hearing her talk about that. And what's beautiful about it is it gives people a little more comfort because there's a little hint of anonymity with Second Life, right? You're not your real person, you're your avatar. And you can have these conversations without feeling like it's me, and you can hide a little bit. And it gives people an opportunity to be more open. I love it. I love that she does that. That makes me so incredibly happy. I'm going to post a link to another article in the description about a lady who started these, what does she call them? Good to go parties. Good to go parties. Her mother died very suddenly, and she was obviously grief-stricken, but very overwhelmed because it was unexpected. Her mom hadn't had any plans in place. The first sentence of the thing she said, yes, I would have given anything to talk to my mom one more time, but it wasn't to hear her tell she loved me. I just needed her to tell me the friggin' Wi-Fi password. So all those frustrations about having things unplanned and uncomfortable situations caused her to start doing these good-to-go parties. It's a bit like a death cafe, but it's more present for people to fill out their paperwork to make their wishes known, right? And I hosted one of these at my house once. I didn't call it that. It was even actually prior to me reading this article, but I had a advanced directive party where I had copies of the forms at my house, and I invited people to come over, have a drink, have some chili. I made chili, and fill out your paperwork. I'm a notary, so I notarized it right on the spot. So yeah, there's a million different ways you can become part of a death positive movement. Just having the right attitude is step one, Go to a death cafe, host a death cafe. You can also join the Order of the Good Death on Caitlin Dowdy's website. If you, like I said, I'll put the link in the description. If you go to orderofthegooddeath.com, you can donate to her if you would like to help her keep things going. She does do a lot of great education. She does a lot of speaking, but you can, be an official member of the death positive movement if you would like. And yeah, there's all sorts of great information on her website too. There's links everywhere. They talk about anything that comes end of life, death and dying. So highly recommend it. Yeah. So that's it, you guys. That's all I had to talk about today. There's a lot. I could go on, but I talk about this stuff all the time. I encourage you to, if you're not ready, that's okay. You don't have to be. I'm never going to force these subjects on anybody. If you just take a moment out of your day to recognize that you understand your own mortality and that you're in control of what you can do now ahead of time, then great, go for it. That's the best thing you can do. Okay? Awesome. Well, thank you guys. I'm so happy to be back. I'm not going to lie, not seeing my podcast come up every week made me a little sad. So I'm glad to have it back. But I know once I am done and I can take a little bit of a break, I'm going to appreciate that too. All right, guys, thank you so much. If you would like to reach out to me, you can find me at nikkithedeathdoula.com. You can find my Facebook, Instagram, and TikTok. I think there are links to those on my website, but my username at those is all at Nikki the Death Doula. Please follow me there, comment, tell me what you think about the show. Oh my God, guys. Oh, I forgot the death deck. Look at me. All right, hold on. Jeez, I can't believe I did that. Oh, okay. So now it is time for the death deck. Woo. Okay. I'll shuffle up the cards. Pull one at random, and you overhear a stranger speaking negatively about their deceased father. What is your reaction? A, don't care, not my business. B, camaraderie. Death doesn't always have to erase a bad past. Or C, disgust. No matter how awful, the dead deserve some respect. Ooh. That's a tricky one. I mean, quite honestly, okay, so I would say A because it's none of my business, but I can't say I don't care. Of course I care. That's why I'm a flippin' death doula. I overheard a stranger making a call to a hospice while I was waiting for my car to get repaired on vacation. And I went over and talked to her and hugged her, and she cried. And Like I can't not care. But if somebody's just really bashing their deceased parent, they probably had a lot of trauma. And all I'm going to do is feel a whole lot of sympathy for them. But I'm not going to tell them they can't feel that way. And the dead deserve respect all the time. Maybe they don't, okay? Maybe they don't. That's not my judgment. That's not my place to make that judgment. So there you go. So says I. So what prompted that was I was talking about my social media. You can tell me your answer to the death question on my social media or shoot me a message there. So yeah, that's it. All right, guys. Thank you so much for tuning in this week. I hope you have an amazing week. And remember, as always, your grief is yours. Your feelings are valid. Grief doesn't always have to suck.